FFT is a proud partner of Jewish National Fund, JNF, which leads the way in helping the land and the people of Israel prosper, thrive, and develop, no matter the circumstance, and especially given the circumstances of today. And given our relationship with JNF and all the important work that they are doing, I am beyond thrilled and thankful that our guest for today's webinar is none other than JNF CEO Russell Robinson. Thank you, Russell, for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Justin, for having me and the Jewish National Fund as a partner with Fuel for Truth.
Thank you, of course. Just to start us off, can you tell us and our audience a little bit more about JNF? I think people have an idea of what JNF is, and certainly very much tied to its really important past when it comes to the Zionist movement, when it comes to the establishment of the state of Israel, and certainly Israel's formative years as a state. But JNF is still doing amazing work today that is leading the way in shaping Israel's future that I don't think enough people really know about.
Well, thank you, Justin. I think that, the history of Jewish National Fund, it's one of the oldest of the organizations, especially dealing with Israel. It's 120 years old. Matter of fact, celebrating it this year, which means it was established before the state of Israel was established. It came about as an organization to literally bring us back to the land of Israel, to repurchase the land of Israel, acre by acre. And it's an interesting movement if you just study that, Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement. And I always say that Theodor Herzl was the original JNF future. He died at 44 years of age, which means in his 30s, he was gathering people to come back and understand how they can make a reality of a 2,000-year dream. And it wasn't about just claiming the land legally or claiming the land biblically. It was about just repurchasing the land acre by acre by acre by acre, which made Israel one of the few nations in the entire world that has a purchase order as part of its existence. And that was the role of Jewish National Fund. Well, to purchase the land is one thing. Then what are you going to do to bring people to it? How are you going to create a land that's going to be a home? And that's the evolution and revolution of Jewish National Fund as an organization. Repurchasing the land and then making it a place in which people would call home. So the planting of trees, which you bring up, Justin, and people know us for, was really an accidental kind of a movement. We were buying land during the Ottoman time period. That means that you had 7 years to either live on your land or grow on your land, or you would lose it, even if you purchased it. So the pine trees that you see all over Israel, which makes Israel one of the only nations in the Middle East that has pine forests, came about because the Eastern European Jews were just planting pine trees to occupy the land. It wasn't to become foresters. It became later, they found out about watershed management and environment and became the great foresters, planting 270 million trees, making Israel the only nation that ended the 20th century, entering the 21st century with more trees than it began. And that's all hand planted. And again, it was an employment opportunity. You had Jews coming from all over the world, Jews that had no education or no jobs, no ability. So planting trees was also an employment piece, so that people would come, fill up a truckload of saplings, send people out so they had the dignity of earning a living by planting trees. So you have it from all over. But again, the evolution of our organization was not just to have the land and to grow trees on it, but how to populate and build kibbutzim and moshavim. Even the city of Tel Aviv, 6 years ago, 65 housing lots were purchased at a Jewish National Fund auction, which made the city of Tel Aviv on a sand dune. So that is where we came from, but where we have been and what we have accomplished is 24 years ago, Israel was out of water. It was facing a water catastrophe, not a crisis. There was no more water for Israel or for the Middle East. Now, every other nation that has faced that in its existence has moved. We had no place to go. So out of innovation, but out of survival, we also created how to make water happen when you're out of it and you have a growing population. And you have this land of Israel, the Negev and the Galilee, that had no population. So you had 77% of the population in the Tel Aviv corridor. And we challenged the American Jewish community to raise money for water. Not just for water, for sewage water. But we thought the American Jewish community was sophisticated and their philanthropy would be sophisticated and that they would come and respond. And they did, Justin. They responded by raising over $300 million, where Jewish National Fund today is responsible for 13.5% of the water availability in Israel, which is equivalent to almost 2.5 to 3 million people drinking water a year. Recycled water, reused water, making Israel reuse almost 90% of its water. The nation next to it, Justin, is Spain at 20%. That's the Jewish National Fund story. And that story continues. There were we set almost 7 years ago, $1 billion roadmap. Now, it's one thing to have a campaign for $1 billion, but it's another thing to lay it out to the people what we're going to use it for. So we told our people $1 billion campaign, 40% of it was going to be used for community building in Israel in the Negev and Galilee. That 25% was going to be spent on the next generation. Now, I will tell you, when leadership makes those decisions, that means that you're giving philanthropically. People 7 years ago, today, and in the future are giving for young people to be involved. They're not going to see what their investment has happened necessarily, but they've invested 25% of that $1 billion in the next generation. And that's why the fastest growing part of our donor demographic is our 22 to 40-year-olds. 35% was going to be on infrastructure and ecology and heritage sites preservation. So we literally laid out in our $1 billion roadmap, and for anybody that wants it, we'll send it to you, a laid out plan that said, what are we going to do with the money that we're raising? And that's a difference of a nonprofit. I challenge people, it's one thing to have a capital campaign, but this was on all of it, operational, capital, on what our vision was going to be for that, the 10 years and beyond. And when we saw that in the Negev, 60% of the land, 60, and when we started, only had 6% of the population, a place between a lot and the Dead Sea, the Araba Valley, had all of 5,000 people living there in that entire area. And the average age was 70 years old. That means that the border with Jordan was going to not have our people putting our hands in the soil of the Jewish people, and protecting that land, not with Merkava tanks or with F-35s, with Pamelas and with figs and with peppers. But we have changed that narrative. And in that area of the country today, there is almost 15,000 people. In the past 4 years, over 360 babies were born. We're going to grow that area and that population still from within and build it out for new communities. Now, if you face what is facing today, where everybody is thinking about how to get out of the big cities into the suburbs or into the communities outside of the big cities, we understood that that phenomena was happening without Corona, but that we wanted Israel to become a land. If we fought for so many years to make in Israel a land of opportunity for people who had no place to call home, we had to create it also for a place that you wanted to call it home, that people who were living there didn't think about leaving. And if you're living in that Tel Aviv corridor, and if you're moving to an apartment complex, and you see that, I'm going to go online and check and see what apartments are available, and I find out that online there's also jobs in Los Angeles or in London, I'm in the moving mode. And maybe I can afford a place there and not afford a place here. But now you could afford a place down by the Gaza envelope, communities that face the Gaza border. We created housing sites where people said nobody was going to move to, except, I have to tell you, almost 500 housing sites later, Kanik Sderot and the whole area down there were sold out. People are moving there, young people with families, creating an Israel that's going to be part of all of Israel, the 60% of the Negev, the 70% of the Galilee. So the Jewish National Fund is a dynamic organization made up of people, made up of each and every one of you that gets to be part of that story. It is entrepreneurial in its ideas and coming up with thoughts that are not outside of our mission. Yes, we have to stay and contain. We're about Israel. We're the only organization that is all about Israel all the time. But we want to have people like you that are involved in thinking, in creating, in utilizing your brain power and utilizing your ideas and thoughts to help us shape our not only our objectives, but how to get there. Because it's not just about a project, it's about how are you going to implement it? What are those projects that are going to have rippling effects? So even the work in disabilities that we do, and we service over 8,000 people with disabilities in the Negev and the Galilee through our programs. But I want to tell you, it's just how we think it through. There's a village called Ale Negev. It's down in the Negev. It is, every square inch of it, Justin, is part of the living experience for the residents and for the family. Every square inch, from scented pathways, from chandeliers that are hanging in the rooms, first class. So families that come visit the patients that are there with mental disabilities are coming to not an institution, but to an unbelievable place. As a Jew, as an Israeli, there's no place like it on the face of the earth. Over 270 residents with severe mental disabilities, servicing over 6,000 people in the area who come from day patients. And we're now creating a rehabilitation hospital so that the people in the Negev have a rehabilitation hospital, don't have to move to Tel Aviv for it. But I have to tell you, it is not about that work alone. It is important. And we're helping a population who should never be left behind. But we're also creating 2,500 jobs in a place called Ofakim in the Negev, 500 doctor nurse level jobs in a city that had none when we started 17 years ago. Today, over 170 doctors and nurses are living in Ofakim in the area. It's a 5-to-1 ratio of care, so it's a great employment opportunity and generator. And you get to help a population that deserves our assistance. But that is the strategic thought process of everything that we do at Jewish National Fund, not just the project, but what's the rippling effect? How are we going to make the differences? How is it going to strengthen the other parts of the objective that we have? And that is an important part of how Jewish National Fund works, how it continues to make that differences, and how I believe that our philanthropic involvement with Israel will be about tomorrow. It's not Big Brother. That was yesterday. It's about us walking together. And I say it often, not in the hallways of the Knesset, but on the streets of Beersheba or Kiryat Shimona, on the places like Akko in the Arava. That's where we're talking to people in Ma'alot or in Yoracham. And we're building a bridge between the people of the diaspora and people of Israel, because there is a reality. The reality is that we are a growing Jewish community. And what Fuel for Truth does is give people that educational knowledge so that you can keep telling the story. And what Jewish National Fund does, and that's why the partnership is so great, because it gives us the opportunity to keep the conversation going in the broadest sense, and you get to put your hands and be part of making the difference. So tzedakah is an important responsibility of our Jewish community. Tzedakah, I think, is one of the shames maybe that we haven't been really teaching tzedakah enough. And we stopped for maybe a generation of understanding that tzedakah was important. It's not just fundraising, it's a responsibility. And nothing that we have as a Jewish community happened because somebody didn't build it or gave to it before. And people built your synagogues or people built your JCCs. And we're reaping the benefits, and we have to build for the next generation for tomorrow. And that's where young generation has that opportunity to take what was built before and then participated. And I understand that sometimes tzedakah, philanthropy, it's like, well, is it nice? It's the most beautiful thing we could do. When you travel, Justin, people give you money so that when you go to Israel, that you go safely. Because delivering tzedakah for somebody is one of the most righteous responsibilities that you could have. So tzedakah is a righteous responsibility of our Jewish world, and we get to keep participating together with the people of Israel. Because 120 years ago, Jewish National Fund didn't start just to create a place called Israel for Israelis. It was a place called Israel for the Jewish people everywhere forever. And you could either give away that opportunity to be a partner or participate in it. And we believe that a Jewish National Fund, that your participation is walking hand in hand with the people of Israel and creating the place in Israel. And for us, our future is also on that. So the biggest project that we are doing in the history of Jewish National Fund is building a new village in Beersheba. A village that, yes, we have an American high school in Israel, Alexander Muss High School in Israel. It's a semester abroad experience. Matter of fact, there's 110 high school kids in Israel today. And when we acquired Alexander Muss High School in Israel, it's an academic study abroad program for a semester for high school kids. Now, our growth has gone from less than 800 to almost 1,500 per year. And it's not just day schools. Day schools are only 40% of our attendance. The other 60% are kids that come from private and public high schools. And we teach them their academics, from their AP calculus to their biology, but then we give them 4,000 years of Jewish history, loving, learning, and living the land of Israel. So we have oversold our capacity at our Hod HaSharon campus. So we're going to have a second high school in Beersheba. But that's just a small part of it. We're going to build a Zionist village to continue a conversation of the Jewish people that started with the time of Abraham, to continue a conversation with the Jewish people in the diaspora and of Israel, of people from South America and people from San Francisco. And we're going to bring together college students and post-college students in internships and in gap year programs. We're going to have a hotel there for young leaders to come for a weekend or a week or a month. We're going to have an educational center that's going to help you be interactive to learn about Zionism and the history of our relationship to that land of Israel and our relationship to each other. And you're going to be able to come onto that quad, and you're going to see teachers that have come from all over the world to learn about how to teach about Israel. You're going to see seniors coming on an elder hostel program, or on JNF future people coming for a volunteer vacation abroad. From all over the world, coming together and having a Zionist conversation with our high school students, with our college students, with our young leaders, with our adults, with our synagogues, with churches, with everybody coming together. By the way, only meters away from Abraham's well, where that conversation of monolithic religion and our people started. And we're going to continue a new conversation, not about right or left, not about religious and secular, not about old or young, but about us. And coming up with a common conversation that is going to take us to the next 120 years. That's going to take you an opportunity to join into this, to be part of this, for yourself, for your children, for your grandchildren, the children yet unborn, that you will be able to build onto the layers that was built before you, that is being built by you. And a Fuel for Truth group, in another 25 years, will come and talk about what you did and what you're involved with and why they have to take the mantle of leadership and move forward. So the Jewish world is in a great, great shape. We have to learn to have a dialogue and have a conversation, but we're growing here in America, we're growing in Israel. We're faced the challenges of that we've been faced for years of anti-Semitism, and today marks, the memorial for Kristallnacht. And it's amazing that, in one of the darkest moments of our Jewish history that we are here, they're not. That we're having this conversation not about hate, but a conversation about knowledge and learning, loving and growing and building together. That we're not talking about breaking windows and glass of our enemies, but talking about building a village together with all of us having a conversation. So it's a real magical, wonderful moment for our Jewish people. Not at the end, at the really beginning and going. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a long answer to one question.
No, I mean, that was all beautiful. I didn't want to stop you just because you're, giving so much, and it's really something that people need to hear. So much of that resonated with me. I mean, first and foremost, I do have cousins who live in Netivot, which is part of the Gaza envelope. They grew up in the Merkaz, in the Gush Dan, right outside Tel Aviv. So for them to make the conscious decision to move down there, yes, it was economical, but also it was wanting to, as you were describing, really to lay down their foundations for what the state was going to become and to participate in our collective story, to be that next step in our journey. I want to touch upon what you had said as far as making that connection with Theodore Herzl being the original JNF future. Unfortunately, his life was cut short. He accomplished more than many of us could possibly hope to or even imagine to, certainly in his brief, 4+ decades on this earth. But with the vision that he had and wanting to participate in the story to really build into our future, I know so many people in my generation, whether you want to call us millennials, people in their 20s and their 30s, what's the name? But for so many of these people, given a variety of circumstances, least of which is now COVID today, previously graduating when it was a really crappy economy during the financial crisis, and just kind of thinking about all the things that we as a generation have gone through, since the 1990s, the first decade of the past century, and where we are today, is that I can also tell you the amount of times people have come up to me and saying, like, I don't see where I fit into the story. We had, amazing people like Herzl, with the JNF and the World Zionist Congress. We had amazing people like Menachem Begin in the Irgun. We had, all these amazing Jewish pioneers and Israeli leaders who really, laid the foundation of the state, of the society that we've now inherited. And for many of them, it's really difficult to see where their role, where their place is in that story. I was hoping that you could offer a little more as to what is it about JNF Future that actually allows people to participate in that story, to give what so many people are seeking, yet are still struggling to find in today's world?
So it's a great question. I think that there was a book written by a hero of mine named Gordy Zaks called Defining Moments. And I think that all of us have defining moments in our lives. It's decide if we want to make those defining moments. Let me take Natan Sharansky. If you want to know a story, Natan Sharansky was in the former Soviet Union. He was arrested for being a Jew and wanting to immigrate to Israel. And his wife, Avital, didn't even speak English, left for Israel without him because she had to leave and she was forced to leave. And she started a movement to get him released. Avital she spoke no English, had to learn English. And she was coming to the United States and talking to anybody and everybody that she could to try to say, work for the release, not just of my husband, but of Jews from the former Soviet Union, the greatest movement of civil rights ever, of human rights. Because, the movement for civil rights here in America was about Blacks wanting to have their rightful rights as Americans to become Americans. The Jews wanted freedom. And the fall of the former Soviet Union by the Jewish community has caused more freedom in the world than any other movement in the history of the world. So Avital Sharansky got a chance to meet with Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States. And she was told before she got in with the president, you have 5 minutes. The president won't sit. You don't sit. And you have 5 minutes to tell your story. And then we got to usher you out. Defining moment, Justin. She walked in, this little short woman, didn't speak much English, to the great president of the United States of America. And he said, Shransky, hello, how are you? She goes, Mr. President, please sit down. I have a story to tell you. And spent an hour and a half with Ronald Reagan. And if you don't believe me, read Ronald Reagan's memoirs, where he started crying and he decided at that moment that fighting for Soviet Jewry was the most important thing that he could do with the Soviet Union. You say at your age, where do you fit in? Where did she fit in? She took a defining moment and she made something happen. Now, I'm not telling you that you're going to have your chance to meet with the president and change the world, but you are. You're going to have to decide that you're going to find the pathways that, to organizations like ours that say, come involved. We want young people involved. We want to hear from you. You have to be a leader, like you're learning in Fuel for Truth, that leadership is lonely and that sometimes you get knocked around just because you decided to take on leadership. But if you walk away with your ball, you're not a leader. A leader takes the lumps and then has people follow them. The great idea of leadership is to get people to follow you, to get people to join you in the movement. And the greatest strength that you bring is that you're going to bring people along with you. And so there are avenues in every place of the Jewish National Fund for you to be involved in. From budget and finance to being involved to a task force that deals with Yoracham or Netivot, or deals with the Arabah, or deals with education, or deals with our high school, or it helps change our new village that we're building in Beersheba. But defining moment is your opportunity to stand up and say, count on me, and I want to have that hour and a half conversation. And it could be with any of our professionals, with me, with any of our other lay leaders, and I tell you with me. But have that conversation to say, I want to find my role. Sit down, Mr. Robinson, not the president. Sit down to any of our JNF professionals and let's have a conversation and tell a story together. And then tell the story. That is the important thing, Justin. It's not to sit around and shrine. That's for the followers. The leaders are to get people to join them, one at a time, mass at a time. And Kristallnacht, by the way, is the study of the bad that got them to join. If you study Kristallnacht, what was it about? How did you have to get a movement of evil? The idea was to do book burning because it was exciting. The idea was to break windows because it was exciting. And they got the masses, people who I believe probably weren't as evil as they were pictured. But when you get consumed in the moment of the breaking of the glass, of the burning of the books, of the movement that you're going to think you're saving the world, then you might as well hate the Jews and it's okay. So you want to be good? We don't have to play the game of breaking the glass and burning the books. Let's tell our story louder and louder. And let's start a greater noise than the evil starts by telling about all the good things that we're doing and about how great we are as a Jewish people.
Before I respond to that, one thing I forgot to mention before for our audience, obviously you had just mentioned right now, knock on your door, say, Mr. Robinson, I want to talk. They don't actually have to go to your door. They can actually do that right here. So by the way, everyone, please, if you have any questions for Russell or I, please use the the Q&A function in Zoom. That's where we'll take some questions toward the end and guide our discussion. It's really funny. You said as far as leaders lead and how lonely that can be, that even in Jewish history, we have seen the leaders that we idolize, that we have elevated to being like, this is what every Jew should aspire to be. These are people that did not have it easy. These are people that either during their lifetimes were sometimes reviled, were not really well appreciated. And for many of them who even we got to experience sort of that love and appreciation in their own lifetimes, it wasn't while they were actually leading. It was in retrospect, it was afterward. Moses, almost had to deal with a mutiny, right? You had members of the Hebrew underground in Palestine. They were hunted down by the British, and their fellow Jews at the time at first thought they were a bunch of rabble-rousers and terrorists. And now, obviously, the way that we respect all that they did to fight for our freedom. It's not always going to be easy. And I think that's something that, especially given today's world, we need to appreciate more and more, is that you may not get to fully see the benefits of your labor. If we want to even think about this even more Jewishly, you are not required to fulfill the task, but neither are you free to abstain from it. We all have that responsibility to play, and it's really amazing to see the way that you've really embraced that personally as far as JNF, leading that with the vision obviously that the organization has moving forward, and certainly to inspire and to activate young people such as myself, other members of the Feel for Truth community, as well as JNF Future, to really take those reins and to fulfill that mission and be that next link in the story that we all are participating in together.
I think that it's so important that, look at, I'll use one of, I think, a modern day hero, Ronald Lauder. Now, he happens to be a friend. He happens to be the former president, chairman of the board, and now chairman of the board emeritus of World Jewish Congress. And matter of fact, I'll even send you a link. There's a dinner tonight for World Jewish Congress, and to everybody here on the thing, I'll send you a link, Justin. They can all join the dinner tonight.
Special perk of showing up to FFT webinars.
Right. Okay, so you can come. But I'm going to tell you a story about Ronald Lauder that I told to a philanthropic investor in advisor group that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates do a disservice to philanthropy. Now, you can imagine 300 people in the room were quiet. How can you, Russell, be talking about Warren Buffett and Bill Gates? They give away billions of dollars to philanthropy. Because if they wanted to be great leaders, they would have joined an organization. American Red Cross, American Heart Association, whatever they wanted. Ronald Lauder is a billionaire. He has his own foundation. He's done unbelievable work in Eastern Europe. And in his foundation, when he says turn right, we turn right, and turn left, we turn left, there's no democracy, it's his money. And he came and became the president of Jewish National Fund, which means he had to sit at a table every month with our board of directors and be voted down on some things to people that collectively did not have his net worth. But he joined the organized Jewish community. And why did he do a service to philanthropy? He got people to join them. And it goes back to what I said about getting people to join you to do. And then he said to people all the time, you know what? Nobody's going to know you did this, or you did this, and you did this, but you'll know. And then they'll know in years to come. I believe when the great history is written in 100 years, they'll talk about how Ronald pushed for us to be involved in water when it was too big and too bold for us to do, or in Blueprint Negev to populating over 500,000 people in the Negev, or to bring 300,000 people to Galil. So I'm with you, Justin. You're going to have many days where people are going to say, don't they know what we're doing? No, but they will. Or your children, or your great-grandchildren. They'll be able to have exactly what you're saying. They'll be able to flourish because of what you started. But you got to get into the game.
Yeah. No, and to connect what you started to say in the beginning and what you just mentioned now with tzedakah, right? A lot of this is all about paying it forward. Obviously tzedakah, like the way that we tend to describe it in sort of the American Jewish parlance, is charity, is good deeds. But tzedakah comes from the word tzedek. It means justice. And it's really to acknowledge that what I have and what am I capable of in my life and in this world is not fully mine. It doesn't actually belong to me. That due to God or due to the universe, however you'd like to think about it, I've been blessed to be given certain things in my life. And with that, the opportunity to give so much more to other people. And I really appreciate how you've contextualized that within what we can do to really help Israel's future and Israelis as members of Jewish National Fund, but also, as you're saying, as just part of the Jewish community as a whole, that even within our immediate family tree and our larger community, there are so many people that we would not know of unless they day in and day out woke up and said, you know what, this is tough, this ain't easy. I really don't feel like getting out of bed today, but I have to because I got something to do and it's worth it.
100%. Look, and I tell people, they say, "Go give until it hurts." Don't give until it hurts. Give until it feels great, but give and then ask. Because the greatest thing that you can do is ask people. Listen, nobody gives tzedakah, gives charity, gives money without being asked. It's the reality. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Oh my God, I just really want to give away some money today." Now you say, "No, no, no, no. I gave to this cause. I give to Cancer Society because nobody asked." And then I tell them, "Well, nobody had cancer. Well, yeah, my aunt had cancer." Well, that's the ask. So you're being asked in everything that we're doing in this greatness. But when then you get the chance to ask people to participate in this, that's the greatness of this. And then you get to give until it feels great. And you know what? I know that money's hard to earn, but but the reality is it's always going to be hard to earn. And the idea of giving it, and the idea of participating with your giving and following your dollars, what a great opportunity that you have. And then to getting people to join you in with it, a great opportunity to build. And yeah, you're right. You're going to look down, and many times it's going to be lonely, and you did a lot and you didn't get the thank you that you thought you should have got, or the slap on the back you should have gotten, or whatever it is. But you have to really look in the mirror and say, wow, I did it. I did it.
Before we hear, or I'd like to hear from our audience, and as I mentioned before, any questions you have based on what we're talking about, any questions you have about JNF, please use the Q&A function. We're really happy to answer this, and we want that to help guide the conversation forward. But before we get there, Russell, can you tell me, there are a lot of amazing Jewish and Israel-focused organizations out there, more than we can possibly count, and many of which none of us have even heard before. What is it about JNF that's so different from these organizations? What makes JNF special? What makes JNF unique in what it does and how it does it that other organizations are not doing or are still working to figure out?
So I think all organizations are great, and everything that anybody does is great. So I'll tell you about what I think, why we do what we do and how. First, I think that we look at ourselves as a tool, not as the end all and be all. We're a tool of activating the American Jewish community and connecting to the land and people of Israel. And that tool is that how do we, then it's a responsibility how we do it. So first off, as I said with the $1 billion roadmap, it's strategic. It's not just running after a project and running after a project. And by the way, it's easier to raise money for running after a project. It's much harder to raise on global vision of what you want to accomplish. But it's more important because it gives you the long-lasting rippling effects. Two, we want people involvement. We want your involvement, and we want your involvement with the Israelis. So together you're making decisions that are going to have great opportunities for the next 10, 25, 50, 100 years. Three, it's an organization that's constantly in entrepreneurial spirit. It's not just thinking about what happened yesterday and resting on it. It's what's going to happen tomorrow and how can we be part of it. And four, it is how we try to keep in front of people. We have a program from birth to the boardroom. So when a fourth grader buys a tree, we want to make sure that that fourth grader, when they grow up, are getting involved in our high school in Israel, our college activist program, positive Israel messages, to coming onto JNF Future, to being board presidents, and to being the presidents of the Jewish National Fund. And fifth, it is on that positive message. This is not an oy vey time for the Jewish world. There's a lot of oy vey, but where we're focused on every single day and read our periodicals. I know whether you read them online or read them when they come on the mail. But when you read the biachads and you read our information, it's not about oy vey. Israel's on the brink of annihilation. Oy vey. You got to give the Jewish people may not be here. I don't know why you would invest in that. With us, we're going to tell you the truth about the beauty of the Jewish world, the beauty of our connection, the strength that we are as a Jewish people, what we bring to the world and to ourselves, and how we're growing and we're stronger than ever before. Because that's what we're going to say to you. Be an investor with us, but we're going to tell you how your investment into this company, organization, to our movement is an investment that's one of the greatest investments you've ever made. We have a return on investment that gave you none other than the land and people of Israel.
That's beautiful. Here, one question from our audience to start us off from Adam, and I love this question because there's too many good answers here. But Russell, who's your favorite Jewish hero?
Wow, that's a tough one because it keeps changing. I think that it sounds like I'm going to take it from everybody else, but I really two, Ben Gurion and Begin. Both, by the way, were really opposites, did not speak to each other until their last 5 years of Ben Gurion's life. Matter of fact, Ben Gurion, when he was prime minister of Israel, never referred to Menachem Begin by his name. When he had to call on him, he would say to the man sitting next to so-and-so, because that's how much they disliked. Begin disliked Ben Gurion, felt he was a murderer of the Jews because of the Altalena case. And for those who haven't studied, you should study it. And so you had, but they were both almost identical in who they were. Very simple, very thoughtful, constantly looking after tomorrow. The last years of their life, they became very close friends. And it kind of shows you that sometimes you start a conversation, you might find out that that person who you thought was your enemy is really not, that you really are the same. And why? Ben Gurion, on a Friday afternoon at 4:30, walked into the museum in Tel Aviv and presided over the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and went home and had Shabbat with everyone telling him that it was going to be the end of almost 800,000 Jewish lives, that he had signed the death notice of 800,000 Jewish lives, that the Arab armies were going to overtake Israel and it would be the annihilation of the Jewish people that were left there in Palestine at the time, now of Israel, and that annihilation would literally put the final solution onto the Jewish people after the Holocaust. And yet he felt it was the moment, and he took that defining moment and that loneliness factor that he had to have, but he made the decision. Menachem Begin, during the Altalena, which happened a year later, where Ben Gurion had sunk the ship of the Irgun, Begin was on that ship, had gotten off, and some of his friends had died. And there was going to be a revolution, a civil war in Israel, and he called for the unity of the people to come together. And later, as a prime minister, he bombed the Iraq nuclear reactor. And, we're talking about Iran. Before Iran, we had Iraq with the nuclear reactor. And he sent airplanes to bomb the nuclear reactor. And you know what when he got a call, and they said, mission accomplished, all of our planes and pilots are safe. Do you know what his first question, Justin, was? He asked, was there a cloud? He was so fearful of children in Iraq dying from nuclear reaction if they bombed the reactor and caused a nuclear cloud, that after his pilots had known the safety, the next question out of his mouth was there a cloud? He cared about the children in Iraq. Two of my great heroes.
No, that's a great answer. And, it's really interesting. The more you learn about some of our heroes and some Jews who've done amazing things, especially in the context of Israel, you learn just how different a lot of these people were. And like you point out, Begin and Ben Gurion is a very, very notable example. Two people that were ideologically different, and certainly the Altalena, in which, one tried to kill the other at the time. But even later on in life, something I learned recently, David Ben Gurion's bodyguard was a guy named Joshua Cohen. Joshua Cohen was effectively a hitman for the Lehi. And even despite their political differences, their ideological differences, that they were coming from two different places pre-state. But when that was all settled and done, these two people who were very, very different from one another became very, very close friends. And Cohen protected him in Ben Gurion's latter days in Sde Boker. It's hard for me to answer that question as to who my favorite Jewish hero is. I think each of them represents something very powerful, very true, and very special that manifests into this world. And so I could not tell you one over the other is better than the other. I think it's just really admirable to see that each of us has a very unique and special quality that, when manifested and sort of attuned to our sort of our nature and what we're looking to achieve in this world, the light in which we shine and can inspire the rest of us is so bright and so powerful. And that's what I really look for when I try to evaluate the characters of Jewish history in our story and who I aspire to be like.
And with great, everybody has faults. And so I think that if you want to look at faults, we won't have perfection anywhere. But
You'll find plenty.
exactly, right, that's what you said. Who inspires the light into our lives, into the lives of others?
Mhm. Another question we have here from Jen, and this is a great question considering obviously the focus of our conversation and what we really want people to be doing is always looking forward. Reflect on the past, appreciate where you are in the present, but ultimately, where do you want to go? How is this going to help you get somewhere better? How is this going to help you get somewhere next? So this question from Jen is, where do you see JNF heading in the next 10 years?
So I think our village in Beersheba, and we'll send you out the exact date in December. We're going to be kicking off the whole village. But I think that the conversation between diaspora and Israel is at a unique moment. If we want to only talk on the hallways of the Knesset, we'll always have problems. You have problems with politics no matter what. But if you really want to start concentrating on people and building that bridge between people, they have to know us, we have to know them, and we have to know each other much better. And we have to get to know people much better, because this is the reality. You're in the world here, we're Zoom calling it. We can be Zoom calling anywhere in the world, and you got your WhatsApp and your and all the social media, and our world has really, really shrunk. And we have to, as a Jewish people, seize on that moment, I believe. It is a great moment in which we don't have to just worry about us who live in Los Angeles and loves to live in New York, because today LA and New York is all the same. And so is Tel Aviv, and so is Ofakim, and so is Kiryat Shimona. So I think in the future, it's about our high school in Israel. I think it's about gap year programs. I think it's about at our village that we're building in Beersheba, we're going to have an internship center for college kids who are finishing college and want a year at some of the cybersecurity or Intel or Dell technologies. We're going to have facilities for young people that want to take a year off, maybe after they've been in work for 5 or 6 years, and come down and experience things for 2 months or a year, and building a different kind of a conversation that really my grandparents never had, my parents never had. Their existence with Israel was a great love of Israel, but it was about Israel was always on the brink of annihilation. We had they had the 6-Day War and the 73 War, and there was going to be war, and we had to support Israel because had to be there just for any Jew that, not us, who wanted to go to Israel because they had no place else to go. But today, you have moving to Israel. The greatest movement for Aliyah to Israel is from North America, through Nefesh B'Nefesh. And so it's people who are moving to Israel, not because they're running from anything anymore, because they just want to go to a great place. I always say it when you hear about lone soldiers, those lone soldiers are not there to protect Israel because they think Israel needs our protection. They're there because they love Israel and they want to participate in this great experience of the Jewish people. And that's a different reality than we had of generation past. So the generation tomorrow is to build on those relationships, to build young people, to have conversations with young people in Israel. We're doing that more and more on JNF Future. We're bringing some of our young leaders together from our Macomb communities, share some of what the issues that they're going. Understand what they got to understand who we are. We have to understand who they are and the realities of what brings us all together. So that's where I see us going in the future, the American Jewish community in the future, and not just by bringing groups together for every year. We'll bring a group that will do a kumbaya and we'll do an intellectual discussion. No, we have the opportunity given to us by all these technologies to have a daily conversation, weekly, monthly, to really get to know each other. So let's seize on it and build our Jewish community. There was a saying that we always use at Jewish National Fund that Israel is a nation of 15 million Jews, 8 million who reside within its borders. So let's make that a real reality.
Yeah, it's funny. As you were kind of describing that, you were making me think, for me personally, I did not catch the Zionist bug, the Jewish national consciousness bug, until I was much older in life, until toward the end of my college years. Had I had something like Alexander Muss High School available, or, more accurately, had I known about it, that could have gotten me on this path a little sooner. Granted, I respect that I got to where I was going when I was supposed to be going there, but I agree. It's different opportunities like that that really help people connect, really get their feet wet and participate fully and firsthand. Because for me personally, it wasn't until I did a gap year program after college that this was the catalyst for what has now led to this conversation here today. One other question I have for you before we wrap things up. You've been at the forefront of Jewish National Fund for a long time. How did you get started?
You make it sound like I'm so old.
How'd you get here?
So I'll tell my life journey in 3 minutes or less, and then my JNF journey. Because Justin, like you, I dislike my Judaism. I grew up in a small town in Texas. I had to go to Talmud Torah class in Sunday school. I thought this was the greatest intrusion onto my life. It was nothing but a burden. I had no ideas what the joys of Judaism were all about. To me, it was all pain. I thought a bar mitzvah was nothing more than a release from prison opportunity and a cash flow opportunity. And it was only until somebody brought me, when I was like my last year in high school, to a BBYO convention. And I saw Jews smiling, laughing, dancing, having fun. I didn't know Jews did that. I thought it was all heavy, terrible, and nobody wanted us, and I was with them. And my first trip to Israel was, and my grandfather was my Zionist bug, because he always would tell me before in stories. And so it was something that happened to me that he told me would happen. And he'd never been to Israel. He'd never been on an airplane. He told me what would happen in Israel, and I felt it. I thought it was something. My grandfather was everything in my life. So it was that awakening that I had. I was in private industry. I decided out of another experience to come into becoming in this nonprofit world. And 22 and a half years ago, I was going back to private industry. And Ronald Lauder, who I didn't know then, called me. Somebody had told him about me, and he met me under false pretenses. I always tell him. And like an hour into the meeting, I didn't know where he was going, and I kind of asked him, and he said, "Well, you're going to be my new CEO of the Jewish National Fund." And I said, "Mr. Lauder, to be fair, I'm already on a contract negotiation somewhere else, for another, it was a private company, I mean, a corporate company. And I don't know much about the Jewish National Fund, and I just met you." And he said, so the end of the story was after 2 weeks of harassment. And it was before those laws of harassment passed, where I could have sued him for a lot of money. And no, I lovingly. And he finally said, "Yeah, Russell, think about this. I'm not going to let you alone until you say yes." And I thought about this. If this crazy billionaire is so involved in this stuff, I just want to I want to be part of this ride. So I came here into an organization that was a lot smaller. We were doing about $15 million a year, heading south. We had less donors every year. We had no young leadership for any program. The average age of our board of directors was somewhere near graveside. It was, I thought my first meeting was 2 weeks after I got here with the whole board of directors. And I'm looking across the room thinking, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? And then I thought, what did Ronald Lauder get himself into? And, out of that, I saw the tool part. And that's where it was always reminding me that I could be part of a change, not of an organization, of a movement for the Jewish people, and bring people along and bring them in and utilize it. So I'm here because I saw a guy have a dream who didn't have to have the dream. And I'll close with that for all of you. Ronald Lauder, and I don't say this just to say about Ronald Lauder, but he could have chosen to not be involved in any of this. He had enough money to do a lot of dreams. He was rebuilding synagogues and communities in Eastern Europe. He was very busy. But if he decided to be involved in the movement that was part of the American fabric and connecting people to Israel, and I could be part of that, and I could do it without his billions, and you could do it without his billions, but you could do it because you just decide that every day you're going to do something, then I want to be part of that success story. And the success story we have today at Jewish National Fund, where we did over 100 million, we have our $1 billion campaign, we're making such strides and such differences, and we're having the relationship with Fuel for Truth. It's because we dream. We're going after the great adventure of the Jewish life, the great adventure that is about us and tomorrow. And you get to be part of this superhero story and be part of the superheroes that are making the difference for the generation today and tomorrow.